get still mad at what I did. They'll attack me, string me up. I know what it's like to be part of an angry mob. To beat and hang someone just to satisfy a raging bloodlust. Just once I was in the neighborhood.
I want to preface this by saying that I actually really like Noodle, and I have for ages. I wouldn't call myself a game dev, although I've worked a lot with Godot and Unreal at this point, but I know a little bit more about game development than the average person, and I've played a lot of games. Gamer creds and all that. I probably won't stop watching Noodle unless this is the kind of vid that gets consistently put out. And maybe there's a point behind the video, like, say psych. I'm going to take it point by point after a short contextualization. The year is 2023, and Baldur's Gate 3 has released. Over the past year, we've actually gotten a slurry of decent to even good releases. The year starts with a threesome of survival horror revivals, 2 of which are actually pretty good. Cyberpunk is fixed and is plenty playable, later getting its DLC and 2.0 version. There is no new Borderlands, and Halo is soon to be buried. So overall, pretty good year. Unfortunately, Diablo Immortal releases in the West, as does Diablo 4, though the indie sphere is thriving and at least once a month an indie game is at the top of PC charts. Or a dozen good games are released if not. Then, Baldur's Gate 3 releases to critical acclaim from 90% of gaming spheres across the internet. Though the game isn't hugely different in style to Larian's previous games, it's a good advancement mechanically over previous titles, and mechanically is the best Dungeons & Dragons game to date, surpassing even Knights of the Old Republic, a Star Wars themed 3rd edition D&D game in scope, scale, though perhaps not messaging and subversion of expectations that KOTOR 2 is. Let's get into the video.
Last couple weeks of gaming discourse got me disrupted. I feel like a moon man. It's old news by now, but you've heard the discourse, right? Baldur's Gate 3 comes out, game of a year, praised by players, critics, and most developers for its everything. Some of these spineless amoeba in the AAA space, though, they're scared that it'll set a new standard. Seems they've grown so complacent, so apathetic, that they feel threatened by the existence of video game. Essentially, they're afraid that they'll have to make something as good as Baldur's Gate 3.
Point 1 is that AAA games will be held to a higher standard thanks to Baldur's Gate 3 releasing, and yeah, that's true. I think we're reasonably able to compare the advantages and disadvantages of AAA RPG companies and determine whether or not they meet a quality level that they should be able to meet. Please watch Noodle's video. He doesn't bring up Starfield once, and he mentions Cyberpunk once. Starfield falls out of the narrative since it had next to no corporate involvement outside of preventing crunch at Bethesda. That's another story, but suffice to say, Bethesda hired slave laborers? Well, probably not Bethesda, more likely Microsoft. And these companies that they hired had to put out disclaimers that, no, it's not actually slave labor. But that's another story for another time.
I don't want to focus too much on Nelson, the dude behind the original thread. God knows he's had enough death threats and diapers flung his way already.
Noodle then says he doesn't want to focus on Nelson that much, but talks about him and his thread a lot, so much so as going to his TikTok, although I did later find out that this is an addition to the thread on Twitter. Noodle has a habit of bringing up something as serious as death threats, which also, Your Honor, relevancy, and then humoring the topic by saying death threats and diapers hurled his way. So later in the video, when there's an entire section on death threats, talking about it too much without any kind of humor, it's a little off. Like slavery, there's a time and place for it, but it's not on the conniptions of why games are too big.
But like, games don't need to be as earth-shittingly large as Balding 3 to be good, meaningful, well-made, stable games at launch. Obviously. We know this, because we are intelligent. If you agree with that sentiment, you agree with Nelson.
A lot of the arguments Noodle makes are making up a guy and then arguing with him. Sure, there are people out there who just want good big games, but if they have any awareness, they know that there are plenty of games out there for them. And with Baldur's Gate 3's success, there will be more in the future. From CRPGs like Neverwinter Nights and Planescape Torment to Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader later this year, CRPGs in the style have tons to offer. And sure, Owlcat doesn't have overly detailed animations and scale, but in the time it took to make one Baldur's Gate, Owlcat released 2 Pathfinders and a mostly done 40k game. Sure, it's not perfect, but Owlcat is also a much smaller and therefore does not need to reach a Baldur's Gate 3 level of standard. Simple as.
This guy's on your side. All developers are. Everyone is. We, gamers, developers are gamers, all want good games with no slimy monetization made sustainably by talented people.
Not all developers are gamers. Not to be gatekeepy, but it's pretty wildly documented that developers don't have a lot of time on their hands, and I've seen what they get paid and where they live. Low levels don't have that much money either. There's plenty of corporate programmers or artists who fall into the description of developer, but don't play games. A lot of people are there to get a job done and go home, and aren't a part of the space they provide for. That's most people's normal jobs.
This is why he chose to write a thread about a concerning trend that he noticed.
I want to gently, preemptively push back against players taking that excitement and using it to apply criticism or a raised standard to RPGs going forward.
Taking a break, but simultaneously going over a lot of the next 8 minutes or so, we're going to go into Nelson's thread. Now, 6 years of development sounds like a lot of time, but we know from Cyberpunk and Halo Infinite that iterations can be destroyed, work can be lost, and while experience is helpful, the product at the start isn't the product of a few years later. Literally, in Cyberpunk's case, where 2 times the game was completed and ready to be polished, but the lead didn't like it. While 2 games and almost 2 decades worth of experience is super nice and helpful, releases are just a number. Halo has had many great releases and a few bad ones. Same with any other franchise. I don't have anything to say on the early release, that's actually pretty correct. 400 developers in 7 different offices. I'm not certain whether that is an advantage or disadvantage. There are more closely knit but larger developers that make worse games over longer periods of time. While Dungeons & Dragons is undoubtedly popular, as a brand their retention isn't great, and I'd really like to see a survey done on the amount of players of Baldur's Gate who've also seen Honor Among Thieves or Matt Mercer Game Table. On Nelson's 7th point, I wouldn't say that Baldur's Gate 3 is an anomaly. The tech and scale isn't all too much greater than Dragon Age Inquisitions, and while Bethesda is technologically behind by a large margin, scale-wise they can feasibly match or exceed Baldur's Gate 3. Sure, it's an anomaly in our market, but the market is anomalously bad. RPGs are both looked for heavily and have a total of 2 AAA developers for the talky fuck and fight games. BioWare, whose team was killed by competing interests and EA budging in with undue requirements, and Bethesda, who's currently having a rough time at the moment with Todd giving the reins to his friend, who doesn't really get video games. You can hear Emil Pagliarulo talk at length about how he wants players to play his games. I cannot believe that I got his name pronunciation right on the first time. If Larian goes bigger, they could die. This is a truism. Like, yeah, if you develop forever without having a cash income, your treasury will eventually run out. Okay. That's not the risk of a mega game. That's the risk of almost any game. You either have the budget and time to release a flop and keep going, or you don't. Probably the least insightful thing Xalavier has to say, but the most dramatically taken. In addition, there are games that are excessively large that get developed forever. It's called World of Warcraft. It's fine, and it's profitable, and it's being developed forever. I feel like the end note is a tangent about how not all big games need to be like Baldur's Gate. No, I don't think anyone is saying games should be bad, but COD players also aren't asking to fuck an elf in 4K between COD matches. I mean, some probably are, but BattleBit players aren't asking for super realistic graphics, and to be fair, they actually have pretty large maps already. A lot of the conversation here is arguing at robots or fake people or something. People who think there's the one perfect game that's yet to be made, and not just people who think different types of games appeal to different parts of the brain that different people put different emphasis on of what they like. It's a little absurd, but it's normal for people who spend too much time on Twitter.
They've already got heaps of software tools that they specifically made to streamline the production of this exact type of game.
That's the risk and reward of the mega game.
When he says big, he doesn't just mean the typical, see that mountain? You can fuck that mountain kind of shit. It's the sprawling conversation trees, the voice acting, the animation, the graphics. Fucking, you get the idea.
I think there is value in having a game where you can go and fuck that mountain, and Noodle isn't saying that there isn't, obviously, but there's a lot of work in mechanically setting that up that you can't do in Baldur's Gate.
It's layer upon layer upon layer of tedious minutia that doesn't just stack, but complicates everything else. Nobody likes to think about this stuff because it's boring and gay, and I'm an ally, but I don't like boring things.
People love to talk about this. The limitation is usually either an NDA company-wise, or that video game development is a smaller niche than gaming at large. It is the way of humanity.
But those hidden fucklers' trials are what turns a promising, manageable project into a multi-million-dollar disappointment.
Yeah, getting everything together can be very difficult. It's another truism that serves best as a reminder that, oh, aren't games difficult to make and finish? Like, yeah, of course they are.
Even if it works out for a while, that scale just isn't sustainable industry-wide.
It's another truism. Like, yeah, it's not sustainable industry-wide, but a few industries, like the Call of Duty mines or the Clash of Clans seasons, it's very sustainable and profitable. And Larian has made it sustainable for the last 12 years.
Me games are a perfect... Yes, that's how you say it. Probably. Me games are a perfect example of this. They've been in the game since 2011, and their latest release, Shadow Gambit: The Cursed Crew, was received super well by both critics and fans.
All of that means Shadow Gambit: The Cursed Crew sets sail as perhaps the finest stealth tactics game ever made, charting a course for the genre's future that's brighter than ever.
In the article referenced, Me does indeed close down, but Your Honor, relevance? They closed down due to not wanting to endure the stress of operations. I have no idea what this has to do with achieving the biggest game ever, since that's almost certainly not the goal of any Me project. The rest of what I could say would be a truism. Projects created to sell have inherent risk, especially if there's not much demand on them. And gotta remember, this is a stealth tactics game set in a pirate theme. It's niche on niche on niche, made by a niche company.
You've created the expectation and conditions to ensure your favorite creators may never be able to give you the thing you love ever again.
Baldur's Gate 3 can't be the new standard. Nelson isn't saying that the game is too big or too polished. It's not, by the way. Act 3 is rough. He's saying that expecting other studios, even the biggest AAA studios out there, to compete with the likes of Larian, Naughty Dog, Rockstar in terms of sheer scale is not only missing what we actually want from games, for them to be good, but it'll run studios into the ground.
I think we understand that not every game needs to be the same. This is Noodle arguing with a made-up person. Like, sure, there are people with brainworms on Twitter who think that, but this is being reductionist. And it's frustrating since they probably aren't real, as in self-actualized people. You know, the realization often event that people don't have the same thoughts, thought processes, same conceptions, and all that as the self does, or that you do. Noodle doesn't get all that nuance, but within genres, I think it's perfectly reasonable for people to compete when they have essentially the same amount of money. RPGs compete for who can have the most fulfilling experience in the longest amount of time. Action RPGs compete for who has the best dungeons or looting system, and Sony games compete for who can jump ship to Steam first. These are reasonable things for AAA companies to want to do. The two franchises that Noodle seems to be describing the most as in sheer scale are Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, which are both Ubisoft games, and only Halo has really tried to emulate it.
Not everyone has years of early access. Not every developer is free of pressure from shareholders. Not every studio has hundreds of employees. And even the ones that do are incapable of guaranteeing a perfect game every time, because that's not how creativity has ever worked.
The games Noodle uses as footage, he's mostly talking about stuff Zalavier already said, is Colonial Marines, which was notorious for having a spelling mistake be the root cause, Anthem, renowned for being a massive internal fustercluck, and Lord of the Ring Gollum, which, I mean, yeah, I guess the devs were overambitious about making some pretty decent point and clicks and just couldn't scale up to meet their goal. The last game brought up in footage is Days Gone, which, by the devs' admittance, linked below, is by woke reviewers. Since it came to PC, it's doing great and doesn't seem to have all that many problems.
Are you saying we should expect our games to not be good, meaningful, well-made, stable games at launch? And I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that the terrifying thing about investing into video games is that money, time, and specialized development staff do not guarantee quality. They don't. It can give a talented dev team space to fail and then succeed. It can give you space to put more game inside of your game, but it does not guarantee quality or that the game will come out at all. And that means that the one thing that money, time, and development staff do guarantee is risk.
Zalavier goes on TikTok to say a lot of resources don't guarantee success, but I partly disagree with this. Because gamers, by Noodle's admittance later, will consume anything, you can hand them bad, broken, unplayable messes that people will still say is good, and will become some buttons, if not a lot of people's favorite game. Quality, reaction to quality, and returns are a spectrum of results that aren't easily predicted. Sometimes it is, but especially when you get to genres that have been in a content drought or worldly events, it can complicate the spectrums further. I also think that for the game to come out never is a bit of an overstatement, especially nowadays in the current digital gaming landscape culture. There's itch.io, Steam Early Access, and exclusivity deals that plenty of people harness to get the funds to finish their project and release in partly finished states to get the resources to finish. What Zalavier is saying was true around 2 decades ago, but not really now.
If we want more good games, we need to cultivate an environment that encourages more good games to be made, which means enabling studios to learn from their mistakes.
I have no idea who or what Noodle is talking about here. I don't even know AAA games that are pressured to be bigger except maybe Assassin's Creed and Far Cry, but that's Ubisoft. Halo Infinite wasn't pressured to be bigger. If anything, people are mostly negative on the open world idea, at least in my sphere, because open worlds were exhausted even in 2020. Call of Duty is still relatively small. Maybe Noodle is alluding to Starfield, but Bethesda has been berated for almost a decade now about making wide but shallow worlds. Actually, a bit more than a decade, and just ignores the criticism. BioWare, even Mass Effect Andromeda, is relatively focused in comparison, though Inquisition is that kind of mid-puddle game.
If the industry continues to push for gigantic scales of game, regardless of circumstance, we're just going to keep getting more bloated, botched, predatory, uncreative, unfulfilling junk food train wrecks year after year after year. And studios are going to keep...
All the reference footage here makes Noodle seem a little crazy. Assassin's Creed is the only correct reference for AAA games going out of control. The VTOL could be from a lot of things, from Blops 3 to Watch Dogs Legion, which in that case goes in with the specific intention of being, girl, do you use lotion cause you be soft, and bigger than the last. For someone who later admits to filling their head with GDC conferences, Noodle must have missed the Justin Truman talk on Destiny 2, where he admits to making Destiny 2 mid so players don't have expectations.
That to achieve that velocity, we have to get really comfortable with failing out in the open, in front of our players. That when you're in a live service crisis, prioritizing trust, then retention, then revenue, could help you get out of it. And that you need all of your designs and all of your creative decisions to be data informed in nuanced and quantifiable ways. and that we're building a train station, not a train, which means that you need to stamp out crunch and any other form of heroics that you're doing that overextends your team. And to beware of over-delivery that can cause future problems for your station. And ultimately, all of these mindset shifts, what they really boil down to is redefining what success means, what quality means for your entire team and culture. And if you do that, I think that any organization can make the transition from a storied history of great AAA box products into the future of live service.
Cyberpunk had a very uniquely hellish development, which Noodle researched, so using it here, saying the goal of being bigger is what ruined Cyberpunk originally, is false and kind of mid. El-Riz moment. Fortnite is expansive and predatory, and that makes it bad? Like as a game? Not really. I mean, I do think there are objectively bad games beyond their monetization, but Fortnite is functionally a good game that looks good, plays good, and happens to appeal, somewhat maliciously, to both child and adult consumerism. Uncreative, unfulfilling junk food games? Yeah, but unironically, let people enjoy things. We can have both good and bad things in the market. These do most often come in the form of open-world sprawling games, but it's not as if there aren't alternative, uncreative, which is kind of mean, by the way, unfulfilling, which, hey, some people really get into that Genshit Impunk story. Junk food games that are level-based, that are eternal runners, that are action movie hero boy, now shipping with girl, shooters. This point doesn't just mean that once you dig into it, since it's just saying there are big bad open-world games, though it gets even more neutered by bringing in non-open-world games. Also, Mimimi wasn't trying to keep up. They're making Stealth Tactics, pirate game, which is a niche on niche on niche. They made a game they wanted to play and didn't like the fires of the kitchen, so they left, since they didn't know that if being burned out was worth the potential returns.
So what is up with the excuses? A game came along that is amazing, is selling well, is being praised by developers and fans alike, and the response is, well, we can't do that. Well, sweet. If that doesn't get me hyped for Mass Effect 4, I don't know what will.
Us gamers, famous for our level-headed disposition, saw the olive branch extended, tripped over it, hit our heads wheelie hard, and proceeded to blame the tree.
What? Olive branch? This is one of those YouTuber moments where it's a double-edged sword. Being smug is a point multiplier. When you're right, it's great, and it can enhance the farts being eaten. When you're wrong, everyone covers their nose and runs away and starts describing it weirdly at parties when you're around. Also, Mr. IGN has more references for people saying things that he disagrees with than Noodle. Go figure. On the tweets, no, it's not Rockstar level. Like, Baldur's Gate 3 is great, but Shadowheart's nipples don't get hard in the cold. It's not foolhardy to set expectations for the big boys around. Even Mr. IGN says, let them learn a thing or two, not, let's make everything absolutely like Baldur's Gate 3. Which is the fake man that Noodle's arguing with. I wonder if there's a word for that.
And make our game better for our customers.
Now, if you've been paying attention and you are gifted of brain, you might already know what I'm about to say. Raised standard is in quotation marks for a reason. He's only referring to scale, not quality, not slimy monetization. This narrative that developers are scared that the game is too good rules because nobody fucking said that. And yet, this fundamental misunderstanding is what fueled the entire conversation for months.
He furthermore added that trying to reach the same bar without the same experience and advantages could kill an entire group of studios, and that's fair to some degree, but I think it's kind of an excuse for the AAA games industry.
Baldur's Gate 3 is causing some developers to panic, and the video is... it's pretty good? Is this IGN?
Great video. Like an actually good video.
Great video.
Yeah. The guy makes very good points, and I forget who it is.
You know, what are they actually thinking? Don't let this become the new standard because we can't make games that good.
I think the real reason why devs had unanimously agreed on this bizarre don't over-deliver tactic is because it creates a baseline to give thousands of devs room to release games of varying quality that either work fine or not at all at release, and this is just how things are apparently.
it's such a whiny, horrible look for you.
It's so fucking dumb. Yeah.
For you, for your studio, for your product, for everybody.
It's not even we're gonna give up. We're gonna keep being shitty, but you,
Yeah,
the
we're gonna keep
moviegoer,
creating
has
shit.
to enjoy it. Yeah,
Yeah,
give us better
yeah.
ratings than Rotten Tomatoes, you spoiled brats.
Yeah, it's like we're gonna keep giving you shit and you're entitled for thinking we should do anything better.
I think Noodle is far too convinced of his own correctness and lacking humility in the potential to be wrong here, when, as far as the video has shown, Noodle isn't aware enough of the game sphere. He gets into being outright mean and cagey about influencers and influencing. He also proceeds to do exactly like he says, like, dude, stop being so gatekeepy. Apparently Mr. IGN is named Destin, so hello, hope you're okay if you see this. You too, Noodle.
In fairness to these guys, they aren't journalists. They saw a video from one of the biggest gaming publications in the world, one that voiced the exact same concerns they had, and ran with it. One could make the argument that one should do more research before spreading misinformation to millions of people, but not me. I would never talk shit on the influencer. I do not expect anyone who isn't in the industry to already have the context required to identify the source of problems with the current system. But you need that context to contribute in a meaningful way. I'm sorry, you just do. And Destin, on behalf of IGN, is in the industry. What really clips my mic is how he goes out of his way to defend his own lack of understanding in the name of consumerism.
Xavier's tweet was well-intentioned, and he went on to add a lot of important context, but I think it misses the perspective of the consumer. We don't know anything about game design or how hard it is.
I guess you can lead a dog to chocolate, but you can't stop it from shitting blood in the kitchen later. You know what I mean. Listen, the issue was never that people are identifying problems with Fartbox Terra games. The issue is that without deeper insight, we're liable to attack each other for no reason and throw diapers at strawmen, rather than having a productive conversation about how we actually got here, and listening, not talking past one another. Imagine!
Listening and talking past one another is a line that makes me think this is actually a psyop and stupid for believing that this is what Noodle actually thinks, since he's not listening to and talking past Destin. Maybe it's all a part of the YouTube character, but if Noodle says psych, I was only pretending to be, then I am the one possessing Elriz. This is also the point where the video flips into talking even past the straw man.
Am I in the wrong for not wanting microtransactions in a stable video game at launch?
Are you saying we should expect our games to not be good, meaningful, well-made, stable games at launch? And I'm not saying that at all.
Then I think it's worth thinking of it as a live service. Like, no matter what type of game you're making. You could be making a roguelike, like 8-bit indie game, but if you're planning to release that indie access, like early access, and iterate and build a community, I think you can still think of that as a live service. It's got the same lessons about your velocity mattering, about needing to be in a constant dialogue with your players and being willing to fail publicly to learn faster. Like, I think all of those still apply if what you're trying to do is build and nurture a community over time.
There are some developers who have pushed back on this video in particular, citing a bunch of smart things that I will mindlessly regurgitate shortly. But that conversation happened mostly on Twitter between developers, while gamers at large seem to be circling the drain.
I tried to find the conversation, couldn't, so I'm going off of what Noodle provided. Destin and Rami also seem to be talking past each other. Destin thinks Game Pass could help eliminate microtransactions. Rami doesn't like Microsoft being the exclusive decider on what will or won't be funded. Destin then says you can get funds other ways. He does talk condescendingly to Rami, but to be fair, but then it cuts off. There's no link to the rest of the conversation. There are some tweets and memes here, but they aren't really relevant. Footage-wise, we're on microtransactions for some reason, and almost forgot about them, since at most, I play Enlisted and War Thunder, which have the most effective microtransactions, but they're freemium games. They're to be expected. That's literally what the games are engineered to garner.
Before this is all over, promise me you'll figure out which one of us is the machine.
The meme is the most cogent point, to which I doubt any of the companies are angry, but Bungie's head, Justin Truman, literally said this. Blizzard axed it out with Diablo Immortal and 4, while BioWare accidented into it with Anthem. There's almost certainly not going to be a hide nor hair of microtransactions in DA4, if it ever comes out. And Mass Effect 4 might have it, but people genuinely do like the multiplayer for Mass Effect.
Look, you're all very pretty today. I'm not here to call anyone who covered this mess stupid or malicious. Cringe cometh before the growth. We're only gamers. My only real beef is with this willful, defensive ignorance.
Noodle's called gamers stupid a couple of times now and implied it with the influencers thing. He also definitely has a lot more beef than just the straw man.
I'm not trying to stir the pot, but like, devs were harassed and sent death threats over this. There's a responsibility to do the bare minimum in terms of research and thought before spreading just misinformation to millions of people, especially when you're employed as a journalist at IGN. But what do I know? I'm just a YouTuber.
Your Honor, relevancy? Let me twist the blade a little. Who the hell cares? That is illegal activity that should be reported to the FBI at once, but let's be real here. Any public figure, and as it's easy to be a public figure more than ever, gets death threats. People will hate for no reason, and some don't express themselves rationally. It's part of the business of receiving feedback from hate fans. It's inevitable, and it'll happen to the vast majority of people online. It's not right, but it will happen, and that's something people should probably emotionally prepare themselves for. I think without providing sources, all the research in the world is meaningless. People will insert their own meaning, but without pasting every little link or screenshot, or it didn't happen, the research is the same as light wind to a house, water on the dog's back, C-SPAN to the average American. The problem is millions instead of million, then that makes you Axeman safe, but I don't think the exact number of 2 million is what Noodle means here. Noodle keeps hammering on the point of journalism means something, but we live in the digital age. Being a journalist is as simple as reporting on events, and with this video, you are now partly a journalist. So shouldn't you be more responsible by your own standard? Or just because there's been good journalistic YouTube in the past, that doesn't mean people can make well-informed videos now. It might just kill them.
Why are so many big games these days overpromising and under-delivering? Why can't every $70 game just have fucking awesome fruit physics?
Who cares about fruit physics? That Twitter discourse ended years ago, and even at that point, most people that I knew were saying, who gives a fuck? It feels like years, almost a decade since that argument.
Firstly, you know, I don't know if you know this, but corporations don't actually give a shit about you. I know, I'm sorry. I didn't want to be the one to tell you this. I'm sorry. The Mickey Mouse isn't real.
Controversially, corporations do care about my wallet. They want to get my $60 and $70 in some cases now. It's typically their job to care about getting my money so they can pay people more or pay more people to grow their cycle as large as possible. They care a lot about developers since that's the person who makes the sausage that has their name on it. They care a lot about influencers since those are the people that get others to buy the sausage. The good ones sponsor more sausage makers and the bad ones keep too much money for themselves or even outright kill the sausage makers. I am really just thinking about kielbasa and bratwurst right now.
These publishers are publicly traded companies. Mickey is, by law, obligated to grow and accrue capital above all else.
Mickey is not by law required to accrue capital. The Supreme Court in 2014, from the New York Times, and I'm quoting, "Modern corporate law does not require for-profit corporations to pursue profit at the expense of everything else, and many do not," which is more of a description of what's going on rather than a direct legislation. They are still beholden to the stakeholders. That's the contract they signed by becoming publicly traded. And as the Supreme Court stated, many don't care anyways. As a part of the William and Mary Law Review, part of that even states that corporations are protected from stakeholder influence, as long as there's not a good reason to do so. I'm paraphrasing, but at least I have a reference.
It's so funny to me when people just suggest that, you know, we just gotta tell people what we want. We gotta tell the companies.
Yeah, that's literally how games get made. There's millions of people saying, I want Call of Duty. Noodle mentions this later, but doesn't address it.
I implore AAA devs to look at these games that are being celebrated and look at your pipeline to see why the consumer is getting frustrated about the experience I outline in this video.
People talk like the guys in charge of monetization at Blizzard right now have no idea they pissed off gamers. Like if you walked up to their office right now, they'd be like, oh, what? I thought they loved buying the season pass by mistake. What? Oh man, we fucked up. Oh, like no, dude, they know exactly what they're doing.
Noodle just isn't engaging with the guy's point anymore, or I guess guy that he made up's point. Yeah, monetization at Blizzard doesn't care because people like the monetization at Blizzard. As much ill will as you provide towards them, the people who pay for it and give them money don't do it because the ghosts of Bobby Kotick are guiding their hands to the purchase button. Although this certainly happens once in a while, these aren't really considered the payers. These are dolphins or fish, but the ones that they really care about are the whales. These are why Overwatch gamers are typically segregated from the rest of us. Keep them in their ghetto, where they belong.
Here's the real bastard of it though. These kinds of guy, not the ones making the floor textures, but the ones in charge of things like monetization strategy, they wouldn't be able to keep getting away with shit like this if the market wasn't constantly rewarding them for doing business like this. Mickey don't just got that guy in him. That guy in him got that Mickey in him.
It's yet another truism. The only thing I can say is that, yeah, while it's bad, it's people's right to do so. Just like smoking, drinking, or making YouTube videos, people are allowed to make bad decisions that in no way improve their life, except to look cool while driving. And for every game AAA isn't making, it's being made twice, thrice, and twice times over by the indie sphere. Sure, the big guys aren't listening, but someone is.
The reason Mickey talks like this behind closed doors...
I'll leave the morality of it out of the talk. We can discuss it if we have time later. You see the goblin going with his clocks, tick-tock. I'll take it away from you, I'll take it away from you. This is a brilliant way to get more. People to spend more. To really hook it down, we need to ask people to do something for us, do a little bit of work, because then they become emotionally attached to that.
I don't really understand bringing Disney into this. The last game they made was Epic Mickey 2, rest in piss Spectrobes. And the last property they had in the gaming realm was Kingdom Hearts 3. Torolf Jernstrom isn't even a part of Disney, and neither is Tribe Flame Studio. These are Finns hoping to get enough crumbs of firewood to last the winter, and you're gatekeeping your Android root system from them. Seriously though, Disney in the media sphere is one of the less money grubby for content, just because they don't really have any good content. We really need more context for this point.
Aside from the fact that he is a scumfuck homunculus, is because he exists in a system that encourages him to think like this. This isn't what you'd call an ideal landscape for games to be made in, but it's basically the only one that exists right now.
We live in multiple landscapes. There's a world, and Noodle's just being really pessimistic. The indie world is thriving, and AAAs need a shakeup, that's my opinion, but there's many landscapes within both that you can stick to and not see microtransactions ever. It's like going downtown and being mad that people are buying from bodegas and sub shops and not making a sandwich at home.
This is what happens when we vote with our wallets. The votes are in. The diapers have been counted. Huge publishers are reporting record profits right now. Money talks. And boy, are we fucking loud. Speaking of agony, there's also the matter of how we interact with advertising. We love it. If you're gamers, you'll know how much the gamer loves his marketing. We reminisce over commercials, we get hyped for marketing campaigns, we love being advertised to. Gamers will be told that Megafuck 14 has 100+ hours of content, has the most incredible graphics since the Mario, has the most next-genist, most openest world since the Mario, and they'll come the most ambitious cum ever in their pants before they can even pre-order.
Putting out YouTube videos is an advertisement for your patrons, or your merch, or the subset of people who turn off ad block on their browsers for channels they like, your channel via ad revenue too. Advertisement is a big, and by some people's usage, negative word for drawing people from one place to another, intentionally or not intentionally.
We've become convinced that the bigger a game is, the more it tries to do every single thing at once, better than everyone else, the more fulfilling it'll be. When in reality, these selling points are often at odds with the quality, not the standards, the quality that we're actually hungry for.
This is kind of garbled, like not literally audio-wise, but structurally. A lot of this doesn't line up between advertisement and what the game actually is. I think most people are actually convinced that a master of one is better than a jack of all trades. I don't even know of games that let you do absolutely everything, but plenty of games that want to specialize in a couple of things. And yeah, something that thing is crossable landmass. Dark Souls wants to have good combat, Mass Effect 2 wants a creepy character-driven adventure story, etc. But these come at the cost of a lot of other features like a sensical story and a sensical story, respectively. That's a joke, ME2 fans. But what does this have to do with advertisement?
We want focused, meaningful games made by people with a clear vision, not some cynical slop directed by committee. But the more you scale up, the harder it becomes to achieve that.
I hate to tell you this, people really like slop. The majority of people want that 6 out of 10, easy to read, easy to understand experience. They, as in the people, the customers, do not want an overly complex game. That's why, to me, games like New Vegas and Dark Souls take years to hit it big and only grow, while Mass Effect 2 and Modern Warfare 2 eventually die out. Under the sloppy, people want diamonds, but will eat the slop to tide them over between when they individually find out when those diamonds are. That's kind of what reviewers are for, finding the diamonds among the slop. And even that could be made into a bigger point about all the advertisement fiascos have happened in the past. Currently, there's a big thing with Starfield having paid off a lot of reviewers, but there's been many situations in the past where journalistic integrity just goes the way of the dodo.
We almost didn't get Baldur's Gate 3. Larian almost went bankrupt years ago for all the same reasons we've talked about.
Larian almost went bankrupt before Divinity Original Sin 1. The article as a whole is a very interesting piece on Larian, but once again, they're in a unique position that most studios would never find themselves in. Already tight on money, and throughout development, they developed 2 games simultaneously and made the wrong call on which to focus on first. Between Dragon Commander and Original Sin, they chose Dragon Commander. It still made money, but not enough that Larian didn't have to take multiple high-risk loans to finish Original Sin. To make the point worse, Noodle says with his gamer stick that if you just make a good game, you'll win gaming. And in 2010, that exactly happened. What gamer would be more important to win over than Total Biscuit, the cynical halibut? Yeah, he did win at gaming epic style, goated with the Riz.
This machine most foul has only existed for as long as it has because the gamer knows so little about how games are actually made. After all, if we knew why so many massive games kept letting us down, we might start looking elsewhere for our entertainment. Moving different.
The reason behind gamers not leaving the hobby they like isn't because they don't know what companies want their money or not knowing how games are made. They stick with it in spite of these things. There are plenty of people who do cynically wail on Diablo Immortal or 4. There are many different cultures of gamer with different tolerances and niches, and the vast majority of people don't care. It's just not in their sphere.
Once you look past the typical gamerisms, once you become wise-pilled, there's so much interesting, diaper-expanding questions worth asking about video's game. Like, what, rather than scope, do we really want more of? How do we create an environment for that? Where does Doom Guy keep all those guns? Is he eating them? We can't have these talks if we keep asking the same questions, shutting out the answers, and then applauding accidental rage bait like it's anything other than a belt-worthy offense.
This is exactly what you're doing, but from the opposite perspective. You're cultivating an audience that gets exclusively mad at publishers despite devs having their own faults and getting angry at an average gamer strawman.
It's just not getting us anywhere anymore. We can't keep telling each other to vote with our wallets either. My gamer in Q, we have been, and this is where it's led us. You wouldn't keep seeing shit like this in games if it didn't keep working.
The way Noodle talks about voting with our wallets sort of makes it seem like he's gonna go postal at Activision. He's really upset because other people voted differently. Like, go up to a tobacco smoker and ask if they know it's bad for them. They'll probably say yes, just like the whales who spend hundreds of thousands on Raid Shadow Legends.
Knowing is half the battle, and battle is half the royale. Like Nelson said, you can't separate a game from the process used to build it. And so the more you know about the process, the more you can contribute to a conversation that actually matters, rather than the one we've been having.
Where's this coming from?
Noodle basically asserts that everyone should run on authority fallacies. Like, sure, knowing more is good, no one would disagree with that except for like H.P. Lovecraft, but someone who doesn't know anything can still contribute. Another big problem is knowing more might not necessarily help. Knowing how the pigs are kept doesn't inform how the sausage is made. Like, knowing how face animations are put in the game doesn't help understand the designer's room. The problem is that you're having a conversation that you want to have that's been going on since Cyberpunk got good. Well, really even since The Witcher 3 and maybe even Skyrim. You're just talking at the Twitter brainworms. You're not even really addressing anything specifically. I proofed this with a friend who agreed that there did not really seem to be a point. The topic started, certainly, but going back through it boils it down to: games cost money and might operate at a loss. IGN and YouTubers are stupid and wrong because they don't do research. Gamers are dumb because they buy the things I don't like. Gamers don't know that there's not a perfect game. Games have big scale and want bigger scale, which is bad because a bigger game might develop longer and lose money. Games are hard to make in the AAA space because their publishers try to ruin the game because they don't want to make money, they just want to keep money. Indies shouldn't aspire to be like Baldur's Gate 3 because the scale will kill their project. AAA games shouldn't aspire to be like Baldur's Gate because the scale will kill their project, and their publisher wants them to make less projects, but also wants them to make more money. I'd like to finish this off by saying I harbor no ill will towards Noodle. I just wish he'd say psych. I know I'm supposed to do research, but I did not watch up until the current Sardonicast. I'm sorry. If you're still a little skeptical, I've linked all my sources in the description. I've linked a few additional links that I just think would be helpful in general. And again, I don't dislike Noodle. I really like a lot of Noodle's videos. This is one of the only ones that I think I've ever disliked. I wouldn't even call myself an expert in the topic because I know some experts didn't like some other videos, but even then I don't know too much. So, cool. Goodbye.